Hello and welcome to the Navigating Neurodiversity podcast. I'm Vivian, registered psychologist, and today we're very happy to have Hemma Patel with us. So Hemma is a pediatric speech and language therapist from Flourish Therapy, and she has over 20 years of experience working with children aged 0 to 19 years, and she's worked with children with speech and language delays and disorders in private clinics, mainstream schools, and special education schools in the UK and Singapore. So currently, Hemma is providing support to students in their school setting or their home setting. Now, we were talking about this, collaborating and going beyond the clinic setting. So Hemma is a strong believer in going beyond the clinic to engage in collaborative work with teachers and parents. So today, that will be our focus. We'll be exploring the topic of collaborating with teachers to support students with communication needs. All right, so over to Hemma. So Hemma, tell us a bit about your background and what inspired you to adopt this approach, in collaborating with teachers.
I think you've said it all in the introduction in terms of my background. I've been practicing for 20 years, which makes me feel a bit old. But I think in terms of the collaboration beyond the clinic setting, we know communication happens everywhere. And, we need it to function. We need it to order food. We need it to express our wants, needs. We need it to build friendships and relationships. So it is very important to start and develop those skills in the clinic setting should it be needed, but then we need to generalise it to those real areas. Yeah. So the best way to do that is to work with the people who are with the students most of the time, which are their teachers and their parents and obviously grandparents. So getting as many people involved as possible to help generalise those skills so that the child can communicate to their best in all of those settings.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the same thing as psychologists as well. One of the challenges is always generalization of the skills that we have taught in the clinic setting. So tell us a bit more about your approach to collaborating with teachers.
So I think it's about, you've got to build a relationship, just like you do with your students and your families, building that relationship, building that rapport, and, make sure you're working together as a team. So I often, when I'm supporting the child to generalise a strategy, I discuss the strategy with the teacher first. Like, this is what is working in our one-to-one session. How can we make it work in the classroom? The classroom is very different. It's busier. It's noisier. There's more students. Is this going to work? If not, how do we change it? How do I change it? Yeah. Do I make a visual smaller? Do I enlarge it? Those sorts of things. So it's about having that open discussion and making sure it's easy for the teacher to implement, because if it's too complex, it doesn't happen.
Exactly. That's the trickiest part, isn't it? Like, how do you, so you have to change and adapt the strategy that you're using to the class setting of like 20 kids, and still have it work. So we know that it's really challenging for teachers. Yes. I think I've sat in classrooms and, mad respect for them because they've got to cater to all sorts of various needs of students in their classrooms. So I'm just thinking of, in your experience, what are those simple little things that you think teachers could do that could make a really big impact for students?
I think over the 20 years, I've actually seen some of this already in place. So things like visuals. So having a visual timetable, you can walk into a classroom and you can see what's happening that day. And it's so common to see now. When I first started practicing, it was coming. And now it's just there as a second nature. So that's a lot of things are happening already. Yes. But things I might specifically ask a teacher to do would be modelling. So kind of just modelling what the expected response is, whether it's the speech sound or the grammar. But obviously not asking them to repeat after you, and also recasting as well. So, if a child makes a speech error, you think, oh yes, that's right. It was a very hot, sunny day today. So, you're working on the S sound. So very simple things like that, which initially might take a little change of mindset with the teacher, but once it's practiced a few times, it's easy to do. And you're not actually, giving them worksheets to do or asking them to make a huge change. But that's usually one of the simplest things I would ask a teacher to do. But I also often find teachers are doing that anyway as well, which is really, really helpful.
Yes. So, that's what I found as well, that a lot of the practices that we suggest are actually good
Yes.
teaching practices
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah.
So even though we're recommending it, maybe there's a target child in the class that you're focusing on, but it's actually helpful for every child in the classroom to increase access, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you mentioned visual schedules, recasting, things like that.
And there's strong evidence for modelling and recasting for supporting children with developmental language delay disorder. So
Sure. Could you give us a few examples about like modelling and recasting?
An example of recasting is, say, a student has confusion with using he and she. So the student might say, he went to the playground, and you know that they meant she. So, oh yeah, that's right. So she went to the playground, and leave it at that.
Yes.
Sometimes the child will imitate you back correctly. Great. And if they don't, you don't ask them to repeat. You don't put that pressure on them. You just leave it at that.
Yeah. So it's about just continuing that interaction in a very natural way while making those corrections.
Yeah. And you'll find that some students will have lots of grammatical errors in a sentence. You just choose one. Pick one. You don't need to correct by every single one. That would be a little too much for you as a teacher and a parent, and a bit too much for the student. But those techniques can really be helpful and supportive.
Okay, great. Yeah. And I was also wondering, because you're like a bit of a role of a mediator, because you're trying to serve the students at the same time you have to like support the teachers and helping the students. So how do you do that tailoring process, between?
Again, it's just open communication, and it's talking and working with the teacher. And I think teachers, if any teachers listen, they might think, this is going to take time. Yes, it sometimes does. But once you've got things going, it's quite straightforward and quite easy. And my job is to try and make things a bit easier. So open communication, discussing what we think is going to work best. And sometimes there are things in the classroom that the child needs support with that I don't see in one-to-one. So then I would then maybe prioritise that if that's the priority.
Yeah, that's very true. You're right. The teachers might come to you with certain concerns, but you're actually not seeing that in your sessions.
So it's good. That's why having those discussions regularly, and even with parents, involving them as well, of course.
Yeah,
because communication at home is different.
Yes, absolutely. I've also worked with teachers who like really good teachers, but they're just so tired and burnt out, and they're struggling with students in their classroom. Like what kind of approach or strategies would you use with teachers? I
think again the simplest ones, like we discussed, like modelling and recasting. It sounds like there's a bigger issue going on there as well. So just trying to be supportive as possible, providing resources for them to use. So if I'm working on language and I have like some visuals, then provide that for the teacher, of course. Different sizes, sometimes I have it stuck into their writing literacy books, so the child can refer back to it. So those sorts of things can be quite helpful.
I'm sure that's something teachers would definitely appreciate, because it takes time to get those visuals and resources done. What about parents? Maybe let's talk a bit about parents. Like, how are they involved in the collaborative process?
I mean, from the very beginning, of course, they're the ones that approach me, and we have the discussion about, how best to help their student. I always invite them into the sessions to observe, to take an active part. And that's been really good. It's been really helpful. So the parent can see what elements of therapy they can do at home. It's quite difficult to do exactly every single therapy strategy at home. It's not realistic, but they can take elements that will help work in their home environment. So having them on board has been really, really helpful, being in a session. Of course, I have parents say to me, well, if I'm there, my child's very distracted, and that's fine. Come in for the last 10 minutes if you can, just so we can demonstrate and you can have a try and have a go. And it often leads to lots of other discussions, and it also then sparks ideas of how we can support that child at home a little bit more in a different way that perhaps I hadn't thought of. So
I think that's so important, and maybe it requires a bit of a mindset shift as well for some parents, because parents coming to you, they might see you as the expert, and I hand over my child to you, and you're gonna work your magic, and then and I guess it's really helping them know that
it's a collaborative approach. And yes, I have the expert with areas of language, but you're the expert with your child.
Yeah.
And so it's helpful for me to know your child.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'll get to know them through working with them, playing with them. But from a parent's perspective, it's really important to have that too.
Yeah.
And keeping them involved in the process. And I think similar to teachers, giving them ideas, advice, strategies that aren't going to create extra work for them in a very busy family life. Everyone's very busy. Yes. So making it functional, make it realistic. Yeah. Of course, I have parents say, look, please give me all of the pictures or everything. I'm able to do it. Great, go ahead. But other parents are like, I'm really busy. Oh, that's fine. Let's change it. Let's do this, do this sound in the bath time, or, talk about it during dinner time, whenever it's possible.
That really helps when you kind of build it into their daily routines, rather than saying you have to set aside an extra half hour to go through these sounds,
And there are some times where you do need to do that. But it's about working with the parent to find what's best for them in their family life. If they've got other children, if they've got caring needs for elderly parents, example, we have to, parents travel, we have to take all of that into account.
Yeah, so every family is so different,
absolutely.
right? What, the family dynamics, how much parents are able to support the child. So you really have to tailor that according to the family that you're working with. Yeah. I was also thinking about, challenges, right? So we all have challenges in our work. What are some common challenges that you face in your efforts to kind of include students in activities involving a lot of language and communication in the classroom, like group discussions or presentations and things like that?
They are challenging because often children with a language disorder need extra time, or there's gaps in their vocabulary. So what I found has worked quite well is to pre-teach the vocabulary. It requires a collaborative approach again. So going to your teacher and saying, look, what's your next topic for the next term? Let's take 10 words. Let's start exposing the child to these words before the topic commences. It doesn't have to be, it can be very explicit. That's usually very helpful. But, if parents are going to take this on board, they can, look at these concepts on YouTube, or they can, be outside and use some kind of multisensory approach to teaching these concepts. So when the child goes back into the classroom, they are familiar. They have come across it before. They don't necessarily need to know in detail, but they can then start contributing. If they know they have vocab, they can contribute. And another strategy or advice I like to give is to ask the teacher to ask the child the question and then come back to them after a couple of minutes so that they have a chance to form what they want to say. Then come back to them and let them give their answer. Or just being very specific. Try not to give open-ended questions like, so tell me about your picture. You might say, oh, right, so who's in your picture and what are they doing? So you've got a better response. So this is my friend and we're in the playground going down the slide. So, you've got you've got the child contributing as well.
So lovely. Like okay, so just to summarize for our audience, so the first one was on pre-teaching. And, we use that a lot, with our parents as well, because I think a lot of times we think about revision, right? After the school has taught something and then you go through the revision. But pre-teaching is so effective. And I think it really helps to increase the students' engagement as well. Because, I've got students saying, well, for the first time I didn't feel so lost, right? I actually knew kind of what's going on, because sometimes they switch off and the attention span is short because they actually
can't access
the language. So pre-teaching is great. And then second one is allowing them sufficient thinking time. So not putting them in a spot and asking the question and the whole class is like looking at them, waiting for them to answer, but coming back to them after a while, and then having more specific targeted questions. So if open-ended questions are not working, then have a bit more scaffolding to help them.
And I guess another one is if you've got a child and they're very confident that raise their hand and you can see they're taking time to get to their point, or give them that time, you're going to see a lot of other students who get a bit restless. But it's important that child has that space and has that time to express their need, express what they want to say. And then it's a great teaching moment for all the students that, we're all different. We're all learn differently. And if this particular student needs more time, great. we give them more time.
Yes, yes, that's great. All right, Hemma, sometimes when, as educational psychologists, sometimes when we see a child with communication needs, we might make a referral to a speech therapist like yourself. And some parents might be a little bit confused, like, oh, but my child talks, right? He has speech. So why do I go to a speech therapist? Like, how would you explain your role to parents?
So that's actually one of the first questions I ask parents when they come to me, if they've had any experience with speech and language therapy. And if not, then I give them a bit of an overview and make the obvious saying, look, obviously it sounds, for my job title, we do work on speech sounds and articulation, but actually our role is developing communication, and that covers, it's such a big, like a wide scope, we work on the non-verbal communication, understanding and using it, but obviously understanding language, understanding what's going on in the classroom, understanding the instructions, being able to express ourselves, using the appropriate sentence length, grammar, and all the effects this has on their academics and, of course, their social communication, social interactions, and making sure that all of those come together for the child to feel successful. And usually at that point, the parent does realise and understand why their child has been referred to speech therapy based on, what a professional like yourself has commented on or found through your own assessments or from what a teacher said. And then through a bit more probing, the parents are like, well, my child does that at home as well. I'm like, okay, right. So this is helpful to know, and this is what I can do to help and support you.
Yes, exactly. So often, it could be that the child is able to speak, but has got receptive language difficulties, which will impact their ability to access the curriculum and so on. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so coming to the last question, which is, what brings you the most satisfaction in your work as a speech therapist?
I guess the obvious one is the point where you've seen your student progress enough to no longer require direct intervention from you. Yes. But I think I learned so much from my students and my parents and my teachers, as much as I would hope they learn from me. So they teach me every day. I take something away from my sessions all the time, and I really enjoy and I love that. And it helps me shape my therapy, I guess. And that's really great. I think building the relationships that actually last. So I still have parents contact me years later and say, hey, guess what we're doing? We're doing this, or we're now in secondary school. Got some that have moved on to university now. Yes. So it's always lovely to know that you've built that relationship enough for them to feel they can contact you and go, hey, this is where we are, and go, great, this is amazing, how much progress you've made. And I guess it's just such a varied job, even if you're seeing a child on a weekly basis for, a few months, each session's different. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if you had a good night's sleep, so you don't know whether you need to quickly change something, And I actually quite enjoy that as part of my job. I quite like thinking outside the box and doing things in a creative way. So I guess all of those.
Yeah, completely agree. I think. I think that's the fun part, because when you first start out, it's like you plan your sessions to a T, like, oh, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, I'm going to do this for 10, and then you end up having to throw everything out the window because the child's just not, that's not working for him.
Absolutely.
That day.
And I think in my early days, that would have been like, oh no, that was really unsuccessful. But, over time, you're like, actually, but that was their way of communicating. Exactly. I'm too tired, or this is too hard. And you're like, okay, great. Let's make it simpler. Let's change this. Yes. And you can still have an effective, you can still reach the goals from your session. You just do it in a completely different way.
So. Right. That's lovely. Thank you so much, Hemma, for sharing all that wisdom and the experience. And I'm sure that has been helpful for parents, teachers, and maybe even speech and language therapists just starting out. So thank you so much. And if you've got any questions for Hemma, please put it down in our comments below. Thanks for watching. Goodbye. Okay, so just start back and then we will continue.